Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. So this is part 6 of video series on .NET 6 Web API and React.js CRUD example. Now we are going to do edit operation for updating the items. Okay, so for that we have to create a update endpoint at API project, right? But for update operation, update endpoint isn't enough because we need one more endpoint for fetching the record that to be updated, right? Because whenever user clicks update form, initially it should display some data, right? So for that we need to have a get API, okay, which fetches the item by its ID. Okay, first let's create that endpoint get item by ID, and next we will create update endpoint. Okay, so now we are going to create two endpoints in our API project. So let's first create the get by ID endpoint. Okay, so public async task iaction result, and this is also a get method. Okay, but it will have a input parameter like int id. Okay, so we want to fetch this ID based record from our database. Okay, and since it is a get endpoint, we are going to add HTTP get verb. And I have already mentioned many times, if at all, if a HTTP verb action method is more than once, then we have to define route explicitly. Okay, so here what I will do, I will add a route attribute on this action method, and here what I want ID to be added in the URL route. Okay, dynamic value. So open here, define the expression like flower brackets. Okay, give the name of this. Okay, so this is a dynamically replaceable value in the URL, and along with that we can define its type. It should be integer. Okay, this expression represents, okay, the API URL contains some value which is a number, which is a dynamic value. Okay, so from this URL, action method can read the value into this variable. Okay, and now let's fetch the ID villain. So now let's fetch the record by ID. Okay, so villain by ID equal to await. I'm going to use context dot supervillain, and we can use find async method. Okay, so this is going to create a query like select query with where condition, where ID equal to this required ID. Okay, so then we are simply going to return the that data single record. Okay, villain by ID. Okay, so this is my get API. So let's test it in our Swagger tool. Okay, so it is running, and let me go to the Swagger, and here you can see our new get endpoint. Supervillain slash, and with square flower brackets and ID represents it is a dynamic value, dynamic content. Okay, expand it and click on try it out. And I'm going to, I have three records, right? I want this third record, which is usually the record ID will be the three. Enter it and execute it. And see, I got my record, General Zod, which is nothing but this third record. Okay, so we are successfully done creating the endpoint get by ID. Okay, now let's create the another endpoint, which is our main endpoint, that is update endpoint. Okay, So let's go here and let's create one more action method, public async task and iaction result, and my update operation is like a put. Okay, so I will name it like put, and it should contain the payload, right? The record that we want to update. So supervillain and supervillain to update. Okay, and it should be decorated with HTTP put. Okay, so that this action method only gets invoked for the request of the verb type HTTP put. Okay, since it is a single put, we no need to explicitly define the route value. Okay, now first what we will do, we are going to attach our up and record that need to be updated to our database context. Okay, so supervillains dot update and simply pass our payload. Okay, so if you observe, for adding we use add, for update we use update, and here there is one more important thing. This payload should contain the primary key value, which is nothing but in our case it is id value. Okay, for creating id value will be dynamically generated by the SQL server while inserting the record, but to update it we must specify the, or we must pass the id along with the payload. Okay, this object must contains id value. Okay, and finally we simply call the save changes async method. So that's going to run the update query to the SQL server, and I simply return okay with supervillain. If you return nothing also no problem, I'm just returning the my updated record as a response. Okay, so that is my update endpoint, and let's check whether the uh, URL added to the Swagger or not. Okay, see, update also added. Okay, that means we are done with the changes at our API project. Now let's get back to our React project. Okay, so since we have created add supervillain for component for adding the record, same way let's create a new component that is at page level, means we are going to add the component in pages folder, that is like update supervillain. Okay, so let me close all these things. Let's add update supervillain.js. Okay, and we know function and update supervillain. Okay, and return imaginary tags and export the update default and update supervillain component export. Okay, since we have component, right, update supervillain, so let's add a route for this page level component in our app component. So go to app component. So here let's add one more route tag, just copy this. Okay, and update supervillain is my route, and let's change the component here, that is update supervillain. Okay, so I am done with page level route configuration as well. Now I have to prepare the form here, and whenever user enter this form I want to display the record that to be edited, and on clicking the submit button that record must be saved to the server. Okay, so one thing we can do is to make this video simple and short. Lot of the code we can copy it from the add supervillain component. Okay, so go to add supervillain component and just copy this entire, okay, this entire HTML and paste it between our imaginary tags. Okay, and we are going to edit some small changes. Okay, update heading will be update a supervillain. Okay, and submit is fine, and I have to create a function for updating the record. So function update super villain handler. Okay, for now, don't add any logic. Just copy this name and assign register with the on click button. Okay, and any changes we have to do? Nothing. We have to import the form component and the button component namespaces. So let me go to the form component and button component namespaces. Copy them. Okay. So import those namespaces here. So I am able to imported the namespaces here. Now you can observe here some refer variables. So those are nothing but use refer variables. So let's copy all those use refer variables. Here we have use refer variables, right? So copy these all the things. Okay. Just you copy, paste it over here. So refer variables also added, and use ref. We have to import the namespace. Copy this use ref. Okay. And import the namespace here. So we have form binding models also. Okay. Now, whenever user entered this to this component must invoke the API call get by ID, right? So to get by ID, we have to call a Axios call. We know that in a component, if the Axios call must be invoked only once when the component is rendered, at that time we have to use the use effect function that is available in the React library. So use effect, okay, and first parameter will be the arrow function, and the second parameter will be the array. If the array is empty, means no changeable variables, then this use effect get executes only once. Okay, using Axios, okay, Axios dot get. Our method is get method only, right? So, but the URL must contains ID, right? But where we can get the ID? The ID must be come from the URL. Now we have to change again our page level routing. Go to app component, and here in the route I need to specify the dynamically replaceable part of the URL. To make a dynamically replaceable part of the URL, we have to use semicolon and ID. That represent this value is this value must be dynamically replaceable value. Okay, so now we will have ID in the URL. So we need to read that ID from the URL. Okay, to read ID value from the URL, we can use params. Okay, use params that load from the React router DOM. And to this, we have to assign it to a object. Okay, so constant and that object type. So the property name must match with our dynamic replaceable placeholder. That is ID here, right? So copy that and paste it here. So whenever this component gets rendered, this line executes, right? So use param fetches the ID value which is it is expecting and assign it to this value. Okay. So that is how we have to fetch the ID. And we have ID value, right? To prepare the dynamic URL, use backticks, not double quotations or single quotations. Use backticks. Okay. And we know our API is almost same in everywhere. Just based on their HTTP request verb, it is going to hit the action method at the server. Copy this, and we know this will contain URL in the parameter because I have already tested, right, this URL. Let me show you again. So try if I enter 3 and execute. So final URL should be like this. Means ID value will be slash at the end of the path. Okay. So open dollar and flower braces. So in this place, you can add dynamic value. This is called string interpolation in JavaScript future only it is. So I can pass ID. So this is ID nothing but from this constant parameter. Okay. So once successful, we are going to get the record, right? So then response. Okay. So we will have data in the response.data. We have to bind that value to the form. We know form variables like supervillain, franchise, powers, they will have control over our input fields, right? So what I can do, I can use same variables. Okay. So supervillain name dot, okay, current dot value. We can assign value. This way we are reading in add supervillain component, right? Here. Same way we can assign as well to that value property. Okay. So response dot data. So it's going to return single object. Okay. So I can copy these property values. Okay. Dot villain name. Okay. Franchise dot current value. Okay. Equal to powers dot current value equal to and image URL dot current dot value equal to. Okay. So copy this data, paste it, paste it, paste it. So franchise, copy the name from here, franchise, okay, franchise, sorry, and powers, and last image URL. Okay, so we are fetching data. So let's see whether the form is data is binding to the form or not. So to see this page, we should have a edit button, right? Definitely we should have a edit button. So where should the edit button should be present in the all components under the all items cards, we should have a button for respect to item. So go to add, sorry, all supervillains. Okay. And here next to the card text, let's add the button. So we have already one button here. So let me copy this button, or else you can go for our React Bootstrap website and copy this. So variant primary, okay, for me type button only, and on clicking, now it should go to not add supervillain. Now it should go to the update supervillain. So update button name will be edit, sorry, edit. Okay. And I have to change the path, and the value of the ID should be dynamically binded here, right? So change path, we know how we can create a dynamic string, backticks we have to use, and dollar flower brackets and s3.id. Okay, so here navigate to our edit components. Let's test it, and whether also test our edit form gets populated or not. Okay, so this is our website. Let me open developer tool, network calls. Okay, and here you can see edit button. Okay, now let's edit this newly created record. See, my data gets populated, and you can see the API call, right? We all got in everything, but the name is not populating. Why? Let's go to our component, update component. So Okay, here is the issue. It says value. I have misspelled it. Okay. Now you can see I got, right? So my data is populated. Now what I want to do, I simply remove these powers and I want to apply something that is not available. Okay, and update it. So for that, we have already added the function, right? But code is not implemented. So to this method, Axios, okay, put, okay, this is HTTP put method, right? And our URL, and it should contain payload just like post. So we know how to get the payload. So go to add supervillain component, just copy this code to save some time and add a object here. Okay, we should pass the ID for update payload, right? So I forgot that. Let's add it. And we know ID value we are reading from the URL, that is ID, you can assign it. Okay. Now let's test our update operation. Okay, here is the edit button. If you click on edit, see in the URL I got 3 and here we have data. Now let's remove the superpowers and say not available. Okay, and update it. See, powers got updated, not available. That means our update operation is successful. Okay, so next we are going to do the delete operation. Thank you all watching this video. I hope this video delivered some useful information to you all. If you like my video and if you want to support me, please do click on subscribe button. Soon we are going to meet with new videos. Until then, signing off.